Hey guys, it's Mark here from ETFtracker, and this is the ETFtracker show. In this Interviews with Experts episode, we've got a very special guest. It's Martin Dinh from the ASX. He's a senior product manager in the investment products team, and they're the area that takes care of ETFs here in the Australian market. So the other part is that they do the listings, they take care of that whole kind of process, but they also produce the data, and that's one of the key ingredients that I need for the ETFtracker app. So all the statistics and cool stuff that I come out with each month, a lot of that has to, I have to thank these guys for that information. So we go through that, we go through the growth of the ETFs in the Australian market over the last couple of years. We go over a couple of thematics, and yeah, there's a lot of that and more in the show. So check it out. So welcome, Martin. Thanks very much for being here for the ETFtracker show and these interviews with experts.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it's awesome to be here with you, mate.
Perfect. I don't know if all the listeners know this, but I used to work at the ASX, and Marty and I, we used to work together in different teams, of course. But yeah, I was always very fascinated by what you guys are doing over there in the investment products team.
Yeah, mate, it's a very interesting area. It's growing. You know how much it's grown. You've looked at the numbers or the numbers that I produce,
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a pretty fascinating area. It's we'll go into it, I'm sure, later. But for me, this area is the ETF structure in general. I think it's been probably one of the greatest financial innovations of all time, and it's been awesome to be part of it.
Oh, definitely. And I think, we're seeing a lot of growth. We're here on, in it from the ground up. But before we get into it a little bit more, I always like to talk to the interviewees and get a little bit about the background. I'm sure there's many people that are fascinated about, how you got started in financial markets and, eventually working in ETFs. Could you give us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure thing, Mark. So I started working in the financial markets way back in February 2012. I started out in the customer service team at ASX. And funnily enough, it was my first job straight out of university. And when I look at it in hindsight, the customer service role, it was a really good stepping stone into the ASX business because it gave me exposure to the entire ASX business and not just one business line. So whilst in my role in customer service, there was an opening in the investment products team. And I thought this would be a pretty cool role to apply to because I wanted to really broaden my product knowledge, given investment products, like ETFs, wasn't really an area that I knew much about. In hindsight, it was probably one of the best decisions of my career. Given now, I've already made a comment that I think ETFs are probably one of the greatest financial innovations of all time. Given how much it has democratized investing. I think initially when I started my role, it was really focused on helping fund managers list product, but that's kind of evolved a lot over time. My role now involves publishing data around investment products, such as ETFs, which I know you love, Mark. Producing educational. Yeah, you do need it. It also involves producing, educational podcasts, content for ASX, like what you're doing, and also collaborating with the industry to improve the investment product ecosystem. I guess really in summary, I've worked in the investment products team for nearly 8 years, and wow. I'm constantly learning new things every day. It's crazy, right, Mark?
Yeah.
And in February 2022, Mark, I don't know if you know this, but I would have worked at ASX for 10 years.
Oh my god.
Pretty sure I'll be I'll be part of the furniture at the ASX.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's insane, right? Yeah, that's pretty much my career in a summary.
That's really interesting because I didn't even know that you'd been there for that long. Like, I mean, when I started, I was there in early 2019 and was there for about a year and got to know various people in different areas. I didn't even know. I looked on your LinkedIn before all of this, doing our homework and seeing that you'd been in, different teams and jumped across to the investment products team. And, it's just super fascinating. And you're right. Like, it's been such a great kind of jump for you because ETFs, they've grown so fast, and we'll get to more of that. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, I'm so happy that I've been able to get into doing the analysis on ETFs. And to the viewers out there, if you look at ETFtracker, our data, it's from these guys right here. So very thankful for all of that kind of stuff. Speaking of the investment products team over at the ASX, Now they're responsible for ETFs and LICs and a couple of other kind of investment products, M funds and stuff as well. Have you guys felt the impact of the growth of these ETF and exchange traded products, ETPs? When you were there before, is it busier now, do you think, than when you first got started? What's that growth kind of been like for you?
Yeah, it's been crazy. That's probably the best word to summarize it. It's, really just to give you a bit of context, in my first 3 years in the team, and this is, preparing for this podcast, looking at all the listings I've ever done, we were averaging about 16 ETF listings a year. Now, over the last 5 years, the investment products team, our average is now 23 ETF listings a year. And currently our pipeline is more busier than ever. And, we're aiming to at least another 10 ETFs before the end of the year. And they're ranging across a broad range of investment strategies. Now, since I first started way back in 2012, we've facilitated the listing of over 200 ETFs, which is an absolute phenomenal effort by the team. I think it's also important to mention that not only have the number of ETFs grown, but also the depth and breadth of ETFs, which unfortunately has meant that some of the more complex ETF launches have been taking 2 to 4 times longer to approve when compared to like a vanilla ETF.
Right.
Now, just to give you a bit of example, Mark, in my early years, we were mainly listing, broad-based index tracking, equity sector, and fixed income ETFs. And, they could take about 2 to 3 months to approve. And since that time, we have listed ETFs across a broad range of, investment strategies. They include like thematics, factor-based, hedge fund, and active strategies. With many of these ETF launches, they're taking between 3 to 6 months due to their complexity to approve. Wow. And some even taking longer, up to 12 months. So, yeah, so even the breadth and depth of listings has increased as well. And not just that, beyond just helping fund managers list their ETFs, we're constantly kept busy by, trying to come up with initiatives to help improve and expand the ETF ecosystem. And, some examples include, establishing a framework to help fund managers bring their unlisted funds to ASX, also helping fund managers restructure their products into an ETF, such as from a LIC or an unlisted fund to an ETF. Into an ETF, excuse me. Mm-hmm. And also finally working with the regulator to help improve the ETF framework to open up the ETF ecosystem and permit new asset classes. So yeah, overall, we've just had a crazy busy few years, but it's been awesome to see some of that hard work starting to pay off.
Yeah, and I think it's a long journey, and I think there's still so much more room for growth. But we wouldn't be where we are had you guys not done all of those steps many years ago. And when you did get started, that couple of years ago, when it was a smaller market, even half the size, and not too long ago, it's grown so fast the last couple of years. But even back then, a couple of years ago, did the markets overall kind of need much convincing to get this kind of product going when you'd have these conversations with people in the market?
Yeah, it's easy to forget. Everyone now knows what an ETF is, or at least more people that I know of, friends and families, they know what it is. But in my personal opinion, when I reflected on this question, I think the market needed a lot of convincing to get the ETF market going. And I think it's really easy to forget that ETF message wasn't really widely understood and appreciated as it is now. And really, I just think I'll just go through some of the numbers because I do the monthly report. I love the numbers. Yeah. So, you mentioned before, when I first started, how much fun it was. When I first started, ETFs were not popular at all. They had about $5 billion in assets. So I started in 2012.
Wow.
There were only 59 ETFs available, and really it only comprised of broad-based index tracking, equities, sectors, and fixed income ETFs. So the options were quite limited. Now, fast forward 8 years later, there are now 220 ETFs available with the combined assets of $116 billion. So you can see that those numbers are pretty crazy, right? Going from something from, not relatively unknown to finally, having some material growth and having some recognition. Now, when we look at the product suite, there's just such a diverse range of products that go beyond that index tracking investment strategies. It includes, your thematics such as cloud computing, video gaming, and cybersecurity, ESG focused strategies such as clean energy and socially responsible investing, active strategies and factor-based strategies, just to name a few. And really, I think a lot of credit has to go out to the ETF industry in respect to their product development efforts. And it's because of that which has really captured the attention of investors and helped driven that ETF growth. And again, I'm giving you some numbers as well in terms of how successful their product development efforts have been over the last 5 years. Is that I've found that the funds under management for ETFs that have launched over the last 5 years now represent over 35% of the funds under management of the entire ETF market, with 13 of those ETFs holding at least $1 billion in funds under management. So when I look at those numbers, it's pretty mind-blowing. And I also think a lot of work is done by the ETF industry to also improve the education and messaging of the benefits of ETFs. And I've also found that ETF providers are also allocating a lot more resources to distribution, as I think back in the days, ETF providers were taking the approach of, let's throw the fund into the market and hope investors find it approach, which, I think they realized that didn't work, right?
Yeah.
And I think all of those factors, when you take it into totality, it's taken many years to get right. So I think overall, it is important to note that the ETFs, it isn't an overnight success story as much as we'd want it to be. And it's, we need to remember that a lot of work is done by the ETF industry to help get ETFs to where it is today.
It sounds like it's a bit of an iceberg, like where people see the top of the iceberg, but there's so much effort done in the past. Like you said, going back to 2012, I can't imagine, doing stuff with the data necessarily, back then when it was like a much smaller market. So yeah, fascinating to hear that. And I like that you mentioned the education part from the ETF issuers. Like, we're interviewing a couple of issuers and that'll get released over the next couple of weeks, but all of them have so much content and insights. And you're right, like the distribution teams, people talking about ETF markets to the institutional clients and into retail traders. It just seems like there's so much effort that they put. So it's good to see this kind of growth. Now, going back again a couple of years ago, did you see, when you were there at the time, could you foresee that the market would have grown to where we are now? Like, it's amazing that it's 116 billion and so huge, but like, did you think that it was going to get to that stage as fast as it kind of has?
It's really surprised me, to be honest, because it took a really long time before the ETF market got serious traction in Australia. And again, the easiest way to think about it is just to look at the numbers. The ETF market, it first launched back in 2001, right?
Yep.
And it took the ETF industry almost 20 years to get to $50 billion in assets. And only 2 years since that time to reach over $100 billion in FUM.
Yeah.
And that's not just to mention that just over a year ago, right, Mark, we saw a huge sell-off. Now, again, when I think about it though, I think, what factors have driven ETF growth? And I think when I think about it, the ETF growth or the exponential growth of the ETF market doesn't surprise me as much. So firstly, I think, the first driver is the growing adoption of ETFs by financial advisors. I think that's played a really, important role in ETF growth. And, in a report by AussieX, they found that I think 1 in 5 financial advisors were trading ETFs in 2019. And then in 2021, it was like 1 in 2. So you can see how much that has grown, right? But when you think about it, the growing adoption of ETFs by financial advisors, it just isn't that surprising, right? Because what we've seen, and this is by chance, is that financial advisors, they're moving to a more independent operating model. And this is as a result of some major reforms in the financial services industry. And that's kind of allowed them to have greater freedom of investment choices for clients, including, finally being able to integrate ETFs into their client portfolios. I think we've also seen financial advisors, they've started to shift their focus on chasing out performance, by, picking winners and trying to time the market. And really they've turned to using ETFs to focus on asset allocation. Secondly, I think the growing adoption of ETFs by young investors, that's probably another key that has driven the growth of ETFs, which again, I think about in hindsight, it's not that surprising. And when we looked at, we actually did a survey back in 2020, and we found that nearly half of investors age 18 to 24, they were planning to invest in ETFs over the next 12 months. And I believe that a lot of these younger investors are choosing to dip their toes into the markets for the first time through ETFs because they don't have the knowledge or time to dedicate towards trading and researching thousands of stocks required to build a diversified portfolio. They have better things to do, like partying.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And, younger investors are also interested in using ETFs to try to profit from mega trends as well, such as, AI, robotics, cloud computing, video games, and esports, and also investing in ETFs to better align with their values. And you also have to think, what some of the macroeconomic factors, such as low interest rates and higher property prices, have probably also pushed younger investors to put their savings into ETFs. I guess the final thing I'd say that has really driven the growth or adoption of ETFs is the rise of user-friendly trading apps, cheap brokerage, and the introduction of micro investing. It's made investing a lot more accessible, and I think those sort of factors have really played a key role in growing use of ETFs, which again I don't think is too surprising. I guess just to really summarize everything together, I think the rapid rise of the ETF market has been surprised. You just need to look at the numbers. But when you think about some of the factors that have driven the growth of ETFs, that kind of makes it a bit more easier to understand why the ETF market has grown so quickly.
That's brilliant. And it's really funny. You must be psychic or something, because I've had a few articles here on the side just opened up, some from the AFR that talks about parts of the reasons for this growth. And it was the rise of, wealth advisors talking about this kind of stuff. And one of the first interviews we did for this series was with a wealth advisor. So check that out in episode 1. But the rest of it, like the millennial generation, looking at this versus property, because it's been hard to get into property, but they still want to grow their wealth, and just various other factors. So very, very good. I think we're on the same page there. And you mentioned some of the the thematics, and ETFs are a great vehicle for getting into those different themes, which might be a bit harder. I remember first time years ago in equities, when I first got started, hearing about ETFs as a way to get into, say, fixed income, because you can't just go and buy some bonds yourself as a retail trader. It costs so much. So there's an ETF for that. But then definitely over the last couple of years, this rise, and you mentioned a few there, like the the different thematics and cloud computing and robo and stuff. And you actually did something recently on esports, and I thought that was quite interesting. So a little segue, you've got your own podcast through the ASX as well that I think viewers may not know about. But can you tell us a bit more about the podcast, and can you say anything about that esports and what some of the other things are that you learned there?
Yeah, so I've been doing my own podcast with ASX almost 8 months now. Funnily enough, I remember we spoke about me launching the podcast. I think it was probably early 2020.
Yeah.
And it's been what a journey it's been, right? And also well done for you for launching your podcast. I know how much work's required to get one up and running, and it's quite stressful, but a lot of fun. So the idea, the podcast, huge respect.
Yeah, massive.
So the podcast that I started at ASX, it's called the Ideas Exchange Podcast. It focuses on how investors can integrate investment products, such as ETFs, M funds, LICs and LITs, and AREITs into their portfolio, and also look at some interesting investment ideas from industry experts. So if you're looking to for another listen to another podcast about ETFs and other investment products, just search up the Ideas Exchange Podcast by ASX on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to podcasts.
It'll be in the show notes below, so people will definitely be seeing that.
And when you mentioned about ESPO, that podcast I did just recently, and that was so much fun. Like ESPO is, for those who are not familiar with ESPO, it's an ETF that invests in video games and esports companies. And it's really an investment idea that really resonates well with me, given I play a lot of video games and watch a lot of esports. And also, that industry is such a growing industry. And one of the things that Damon, he was the guy from Vanek that was on, he said that this industry is bigger than the movie and music industry, which that is absolutely phenomenal. And it really makes it a major industry in the entertainment industry. And I guess, due to its size and growth, it becomes a pretty interesting investment opportunity for investors.
Yeah, I was surprised at some of the numbers that you guys were going through there. Like I knew esports were popular. They've run their own kind of tournaments and events, and I'm sure that we would have seen maybe a lot, or maybe there's been more growth. I haven't looked at the numbers, and I'm a numbers guy, so it's hard to say any statements without looking at the numbers. But
100 mil.
Oh my goodness.
That product, it's only launched recently, it would make it one of the fastest growing ETFs to reach 100 mil. So yeah, very impressive.
That is crazy. That is really rapid kind of growth. And it just shows the popularity of a product like that. Like if I was to think about investing in, a video gaming company, I'd be looking at the individual companies themselves and what exchanges are they on. But here you've got a homegrown way to trade it. If you're in Australia, just very easily, you can just buy ESPO via one of the brokers that are out there. So that's really interesting. And just continuing on with that theme of the different types of thematics that are coming out there. There's been talk a lot overseas, but also a little bit over here about a blockchain type ETF. And there's pros and cons to, people talking in the media about this, but I guess you can't really say anything too much about, if there's going to be one listed and whatnot, but we've seen in the papers that various companies have applied. But what are your thoughts on, whether it's here or overseas as well, this potential? There's a lot of talk about, blockchain and Bitcoin type ETFs. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. I think maybe I'll just turn to each area separately, but are you talking more about Bitcoin or blockchain?
More
Which area are you referring?
Probably the Bitcoin ones, because that's the
Bitcoin
one that has had a lot more filings overseas. So in one of the recent newsletters that we had, there was a list from Bloomberg, and it just showed so many different filings over the last couple of years, whether it's the Winklevi brothers and all of these others applying for Bitcoin type ETFs. Yeah,
it's been wild. I think the SEC at 21, which is pretty absurd. It's pretty crazy. For me, I love the idea of a local Bitcoin ETF coming to market. For our listeners who may not know, ASIC recently launched a consultation to help legitimize Bitcoin, along with other crypto assets for funds and retail investors. Yeah, and kind of ASICs really asks cryptocurrency stakeholders and other interested parties like the ASX to address the pros and cons of allowing ETFs to hold crypto assets. They've asked us and other stakeholders to address issues in the crypto asset market, including whether crypto asset ETFs can meet existing expectations for ETFs, including whether crypto assets, such as Bitcoin, are an appropriate underlying asset to be wrapped into an ETF, whether crypto assets can be reliably priced, and given that the cryptocurrency market's quite fragmented. I think there's 43 cryptocurrency exchanges, so there's no real central authority that consolidate all the prices. And finally, how product issuers can ensure that their crypto asset or Bitcoin ETF can comply with ASIC's crypto ASIC framework, including whether they have sufficient custody arrangement, risk management processes, and procedures and disclosures. I guess after ASIC's kind of reviewed all those submissions from the stakeholders, ASIC will then consider each and everyone's feedback and then issue a feedback report towards the end of 2021. So although I can't really dwell into too much of our responses and what sort of ETFs that we have in the pipeline that will hold Bitcoin due to confidentiality reasons, overall, I'm very supportive of a Bitcoin ETF. For me, one of the reasons why I'm supportive of a Bitcoin ETF is that it really simplifies the process of investing in Bitcoin. And the way you have to think about it is, how do investors get access to Bitcoin right now? And they get access to Bitcoin or other crypto assets by signing up to a cryptocurrency exchange, which are generally either offshore, not licensed by ASIC, or operate with little or no oversight from a regulatory body. So, and then on top of that, investors are also responsible for keeping their own private keys safe by either storing their private keys in a secure place themselves, and hopefully not losing it, as some people have read in the newspaper.
Yeah.
Or entrusting this with a cryptocurrency exchange, which may involve them buying a hardware wallet to protect their Bitcoin. Now, with a Bitcoin ETF, investors don't need to worry about private keys, storage, or security, as this is all outsourced to the ETF provider, and they've done the due diligence behind that. A Bitcoin ETF would also allow investors to buy and sell cryptocurrencies more easily through their broker, and also enable them to more smoothly integrate it into their portfolios, including also making it easier to rebalance, given it will be all stored in the same place as their other ASX investments. Overall, I think there is still a lot of work to do before we get a Bitcoin ETF, but I feel we're kind of heading in the right direction, and I'm a big 2 thumbs up for a Bitcoin ETF.
Mate, that's massive, and we're seeing like a lot of positive news overseas. And I guess it's a global market now, ETFs and other kinds of investments. But over there, they're doing things like Bitcoin futures as well, and hopefully that is a good sign for the SEC looking at that kind of stuff. And if there's more of those applications, can help ensure what I guess a lot of people are worried about, which is the volatility around Bitcoin. But yeah, that's massive, and a lot of good insights there from that. Now, one of the other thematics that's really popular has been the whole ESG play, and it'd be good to get your insights on that. That there's a hydrogen. I think there's ETF Securities announced this week in Financial Standard that there's a hydrogen kind of ETF that they're bringing out to market, and there's all these other ones from Beta Shares, from eInvest, and all these other providers of environmental and just these really sustainable kinds of ETFs that are out there. Do you see that kind of thing continuing to grow? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we'll continue to see product development in that space for sure, and you just have to think about some of the driving factors of why product issuers are developing products in that area. And there's just a lot of interest in the renewable energy space, and with major economies targeting net zero emissions. And I don't know if you read recently, the UN recently issued a report outlining a code red for humanity, which is a bit scary. Which basically means that some of the impacts of climate change are intensifying and irreversible. So I think, for those particular reasons, we should see a lot of product development in that particular space, because it's just an interesting area that is currently really resonating with investors, in particular millennials. And if you look at some of the listings, it's crunching some of the numbers over the last 20 ETF listings, 5 of them have been ESG listings.
Wow.
And interestingly, those 5 ETFs have done really well. They've accumulated over $378 million over the last 12 months, which really shows that these products are, they are resonating well with investors.
That's fantastic. I think that's going to be put into a quote that I'll put out on the ETFtracker Instagram and a tribute to you. But look, there's a lot of content and detail that we've gone through today. And I know we're just scratching the surface with all this kind of stuff. But we mentioned the podcast that you've got, and we'll definitely put that in the show notes there so that people can listen to that. You've got a back catalogue now already, haven't you? You've had a few of these. What episode are we up to now?
Up to episode 8, yeah. So we've covered just so many topics. It's been hard to keep up, and to be fair, it's not even my day-to-day job. It's extracurricular, but it's been awesome. Every episode I do, I learn so much. We've already covered some of the stuff I've learned from the ESPO episode. So yeah, it's been quite a journey, a lot of hard work, but it's been awesome to see getting some good feedback on it.
Even if people aren't necessarily interested in ETFs, I suggest that you just check out the episode, because you guys go over some cool gamer topics as well. So I think that's really cool. So look, if people are interested as well in just like, looking at some of the content that you guys have, are you on LinkedIn? Can people follow you on LinkedIn?
Yeah, for sure. If you're looking to get a bit more information, or you want to reach out to me, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can use my LinkedIn handle, Martin at ASX. I recently developed that for the Ideas Exchange podcast. Or you can search for me, Martin Dinh ASX on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, look, Martin, really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy with all of the, the keeping up the markets kind of work. And not just that, but just as I said, guys, this is the guy, this is the man here where I get the data from that I need for ETFtracker. So, make sure that you show him some love and appreciation, and check out the podcast and more. Martin, thanks very much for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mark.
Cheers. Well, that was an amazing set of insights there that I didn't even know about some of that data. That is crazy. It just goes to show that there's always something new to learn, even when you look at the data as much as I do in the ETF markets. So again, we thank the ASX and we thank Martin for his time. And if you're interested in more of this kind of information, check out the show notes below for the Ideas Exchange podcast that Martin takes care of. They got some great guests there as well, and a couple of other links to the stuff that they do over at the ASX. So check it out. Thanks for your time. I'm Mark. This is ETF Tracker. This is the ETF Tracker show. So make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Happy investing.